All right, everyone. Welcome back to the second installment in Two Dudes Healing with my good buddy, Dr. Bob Dennis, and me, Sage Rader. What's up, Bob?
Hey, brother, what's going on, man? How you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. How's your patheticity? Are you pretty
My
peak pathetic?
patheticity, I'm at peak patheticness. My patheticity is at its peak. Actually, I passed peak patheticity, if I may say, a few days ago. Since my hip replacement 1 week ago today, I've been using my device, which I know you're interested in. We're talking about healing together with these technologies, and I went in for my second physical therapy today, and the physical therapist remarked, he said, wow, he said, man, it's like you have zero swelling. What's going on?
Mm.
He's like, you must really be using that ice, and stuff. And I don't want to put him in a bad spot where, I tell them I'm not following their instructions, because I'm not. I'm not using any ice. I'm not doing any of that stuff. Right. I'm just using the M1 system, just exactly like the ones we have on the webpage. And it's like where my hip was replaced, there is zero swelling and the pain is way down. So a week into it, I'm at somewhere between 3 and 4 week healing point. So I'm feeling really good about it.
That's incredible. Wow. So when a guy's using his own device to get over his own surgery, it might be something you want to take notice of. In the
Yep.
last week, have used the C5, which is different. We'll talk about the A9, the M1, and the C5. These are three versions of the same sort of device.
Right.
I used the C5 when I slept, and I sleep on those coils. And I wake up, and no matter how bad it gets from the day before, I wake up almost at 100%. We're still working on getting some of the inflammation of the nerve off of the foot. I still don't have a lot of feeling in my right foot, and sometimes it cramps up and spasms. But if it wasn't for the C5 version of your device that I sleep on, so 6 to 8 hours a night, I am on, or a day, a 24-hour cycle, I am on that device. So I've found a great deal of pain relief in the last week and found a generalized reduction in any of the medications that were still lingering and as necessary. I just haven't had to take them because I stopped doing certain things and I upped my time on the PEMF device.
Oh, that reminds me. I was going to remark that they had also prescribed me a bottle, big bottle of oxycodone, and I never took any. So,
Wow.
you know, I don't want to advertise this, but there it is. There it sits unopened. But they said, oh, you're going to need it for sure. And I'm like, oh, no. So, in addition to having no real swelling, and the healing seems to be going really well. I'm getting a lot of strength back, but
Mm.
I don't need the oxy because I just don't have that level of pain.
How huge is that?
For me, that's really huge. That's really huge.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, that's really huge.
That's
You
why
know,
we met. I was trying to deal with all of my stuff without opioids. And
yeah,
your device consistently has been the means by which I've done that.
yeah.
Really, again and again and again.
Well, we had that nursing survey I was telling you about, and many people said they went, using our device went off of opioids, and because it takes that edge off, and you just don't, for anything that any of these people are talking about or that I'm experiencing, you just don't need them. I mean, you still feel pain, right? It's just not that level anymore. It's not that deep and that profound.
Mm.
You know,
So
you manage.
can you talk a little bit about the devices? Excuse
Oh
me.
yeah.
Of course, now my voice wants to do a thing. We've talked around what they are, but we've talked about how you invented it for NASA in the last conversation. What is it that we're talking about? And what are the different models that you and I are talking about? And how can the people actually find them? Where can they find them?
Well, I hide them. No one can find them.
Like Easter
I'm,
eggs.
I'm precious. Now, this is the one that I'm wearing right now. It's the C5. It is not the size of my head. It's actually about half the size of a deck of cards. I'll try to zoom in. Imagine my head's not there. It's just, I'll put it in the palm of my hand. You can see it. It's an M1.
That's the
Okay,
M1. Yeah.
called the M1. That's the one I'm wearing on my hip right now. That's keeping my inflammation to zero. Now you were using the C5, and all that the C5 is electronically, it is exactly 4 of these on the same board. So it has 4 outputs instead of 1. This is 1 output signal. Yours has 4 with 4 identical control and driver things. So you're technologically, you're using the same thing I'm using times 4. And so, like the same way you use it, I use it too when I'm sleeping. In fact, my feet are on it right now. It's a little pad of coils that's driven by a C5, and I put it right under my like bed sheet, so it just stays where I want it, and I just put my foot right on it, and that's it. So that's the thing. So the technology, this is in its generation 6.0. It's pretty stable, and I haven't really been able to improve it much beyond this. But I mean, this represents a 99.8% reduction in energy requirement. So it's 500 times more efficient, 99.8% reduction in energy requirement. And this is down to 52 grams, whereas the original model was like the size and weight of a microwave oven, right? So,
Can you tell us what it is about that device that interacts with human biology? And I know you don't know exactly how, and without making any promises, can we just get a little bit of a lesson from you in 8th grade biology, a human cell, and why the cell seems to work like a capacitor or in some kind of symbiotic relationship with PEMF such that inflammation goes away, pain gets reduced, opioids become unnecessary? These sound like fantastic claims, which we're not making. Treating, preventing, diagnosing, or curing. We're simply telling our own story. People are going to want to know, why does PEMF even remotely come in the category of something we should listen to or pay attention to? And then how does that work in biology?
well, that is, I think, the most profound question about this. And let me just say that's unknown. We have a lot of things that we could talk about intelligently, some good hypotheses, but like the exact mechanism of PEMF is unknown. And if somebody offers to sell you the secret, then they're looking to rip you off. And you
There's
can
a lot
tell
of
them,
that out there.
you can go ahead and tell them that I told them to screw off, because nobody knows. The person who figures this out is likely to get a Nobel Prize, because I think it's going to involve being able to make a cellular measurement we can't currently make, which will open up our ability to physiologically monitor a whole series of membrane receptors that we can't currently. We sort of know they're there, but we can't really measure them because of the way that ions move across and along cell membranes. There's things we just can't do yet. There's some things we can do, and it's amazing, and it's explained a lot of biology. There's some things we can't do. So let me sort of explain to you. I think you asked about the human body, and I've recently done experiments on plants,
Mm-hmm.
seeds, and gotten this very similar results. I mean, we don't know about pain receptors in plants, but we know about germination rate and growth rate and things like that. And so I'd like to back it up and say whatever's happening is a really fundamental mechanism to life.
Mm.
We're talking
That's
not
a
just
thing.
human, we're talking not just animals, we're not just talking about vertebrates, we're talking about living things on Earth. Okay, seem to
Existence.
respond to this, right? So, what's the common thing between all living things on Earth? Well, we all have electrochemistry and we all have cells, right? So, I think you're right. When you get down to the level of the cell, what's going on, and you can do the calculus. It's actually differential equations to prove that this must be happening, what I'm about to tell you, but you can't prove that that's the actual thing that's making the biological effect. So I can prove with math, okay, this must be happening. The thing that must be happening is that the way that I've designed the system with the pulsing magnets and the coils, really the magic is in the shape of the magnetic wave over time. And it needs to be a really sharp on and a really sharp off. And then if you do some calculus called a derivative, differentiation, you get what's called inductive coupling.
Mhm.
It's how inductive TikToks work, or like wireless chargers and cell phones work this way. It's like how you transmit energy through space using electromagnetic waves. And the way I think it's working in biology is that if you imagine a cell, okay, shaped like a donut, right? And the outside of the donut is the outside of the cell. And the hole in the donut would be something inside the cell, like could be the nucleus or something else, right? As you pass a magnetic field through it, it's not the passing of the magnetic field that matters, but how quickly you change the passing of that magnetic field causes things with a charge on them, electrons, but also positive charges on proteins and stuff like that. Anything that's in the cell or in the solution, the aqueous solution around the cells, that will actually get tugged one direction or the other direction.
Hmm.
It's called right hand rule. It's like if you've got these magnetic fields kind of zooming in and out of the screen in the iPhone, you'll cause these ions to go in these circular currents that would perfectly go around cells, but not just the outsides of cells, but the outsides of cell nuclei and the outsides of organelles inside cells. And this isn't like, ooh, Shay, wave your hands, mysticism. This is like must be happening. I can calculate, I can tell you how much, I can tell you the level of force. This is like known physics, right? The question is, can the cell sense that?
Hmm.
That's your
Is a
question.
cell sentient? Yeah.
Is the cell sentient to that kind of a signal? That kind of a signal being the movement of a charge along a membrane. We
So can
can
I
measure.
can I jump
Go
in
ahead.
here real quick? Yeah. So
Sure.
Dr. Peter Litchfield has created the thesis upon which neuroacrobatics and everything that I'm doing is based. And that is that every cell has its own learning and operating system. A blood spatter on an egg yolk, which is the very beginning, very nascent formation of a heart, can
Yeah.
turn lights on and off sufficient to incubate that egg. You reverse the order necessary, it will also learn to turn them on and off. You add a stimulus like shaking and vibrating the egg tray, it will still learn that blood spatter on an egg yolk. That single cell will learn to turn things on and off. And so, this premise that a cell is intelligent, that has an operating system, there's respiratory intelligence. Breathing's only the first part of respiration. So, I believe there's bleed over between what you're talking about and the same electromagnetic forces at work already, the intelligence of the universe at work in every cell. And we can't prove it yet with the science that we have, but you're talking about quote unquote magic, invisible electromagnetic forces acting on something that we can actually see and touch and work with.
Now, as a scientist, I would say that my intuitive sense is that cells are in fact intelligent, and I agree with you totally on this. And it's like many things in science. A lot of times, before you can prove anything, you got to observe it. Before you can observe it, you have to be receptive to that observation. So you have
Mm.
to, you know, so I am very receptive to the idea of cellular intelligence and whatever that is. And it just, I don't think we even have a good way to describe it, right? But in this case, I think the connectedness of the cells or derangements in their connectedness is part of the information that we transfer when we transfer this energy. Because it is energy. And you calculate the amount of energy being transferred. Just like if you're heating something up on your cooktop, there you're transferring heat energy, right? So it's nothing, nothing mysterious about it. I mean, it is mysterious in a lot of wonderful ways, but it's also physics, okay?
Yep.
And so yeah, I think that there's a lot of truth to this, and the person who understands this mechanism, this receptivity of the cell to this, and it could come down to a simple receptor that says, I see a moving charge, and that means something is happening. So let me describe what I think is analogous to you about this. I think this is PEMF is analogous in some ways to a sauna. And there's a lot of really good research on sauna, where a sauna is physiologically equivalent in your body and your mitochondria to like moderate exercise. And it's because thermally, it's causing the same kinds of U stress, good stress, EU stress, good stress on cells and organelles that is in almost every biochemical way identical to moderate exercise. And I think PEMF is the same way,
Mm.
but it's not mitochondrial per se. It's more extra intracellular. And here's why. Like, imagine the cells of your body like a dry kitchen sponge. You put water in it. When you squeeze that sponge, water moves, right? Well, if you could detect the charges in the electrons and the salt, ions of the water, if you could detect their movement, you can detect the squeezing of that sponge. And it's an open question in biology. How is it that we can detect when you're up and moving around and walking? Your body can tell the difference between when you're just like laid out versus up and moving. You're much more healthy, but we don't actually know how the body can do that. And so my hypothesis is that the way your body does it is by detecting the movements of charge that are dissolved in the fluids around your cells. And
Mm.
as those go bouncing along your cells detect that movement and they equate it to health and movement development, and they respond accordingly. And so PEMF emulates that ionic movement in the
Mm.
same way that a sauna emulates the thermogenic, metabolic activity in mitochondria when you're having a sauna that equates to moderate exercise. I think they're analogous that way.
I think you just sparked something for me, if I can jump in. Juvent, which is a micro impact platform, also,
Yep.
I think, works on this principle
Yeah,
of.
but see, they're using mechanical. I've talked to one of the owners actually of Juvent, and their paper, their original paper that they based that product on, was it's a very important paper from back when I was a graduate student, like 1991, I think, where they put a bunch of sheep onto these, the hind legs of these sheep, and they put them on these vibrating plates, and then they measured their bone densities, which went up. And they're saying that, this kind of vibration can be used to signal cells to generate more bone density. And it's an
Yep.
open question. How
Yep.
do the bones detect that? And one of the answers is what they call streaming currents, we
Oh,
think.
whoa, 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 whoa. I was going to jump in and say that. I think the bones are piezoelectric, dude. They've
There you go.
discovered
Well,
some impact motion sends an electrical charge, assuming
yeah,
proper mineralization of bone and bone density, et cetera.
there's a few mechanisms. One of them is piezoelectric. The other one is there a receptor to detect the motion of a charge? And that would be called a streaming current. Like if you squeeze a wet sponge filled with salt ions and you force the ions all in one direction, that's the equivalent of a current because you're causing charges to flow in a net direction. So that's called a streaming current, and we think that that's the mechanism going on with that vibratory plate. What's cool about PEMF is it doesn't really involve anything physical.
Yep.
So you could do it on even the sort of like the weakest, most pathetic tissues. You can simulate that they're able to exercise. And then the cells themselves can detect that and start to echo back that signal of, okay, we're exercising, we're healthy, let's all get together, kumbaya, grow, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's what I
That's
think's
my
going on.
story, dude. Hey, real quick, let's jump to signal to noise ratio. You mentioned something the size of a toaster. We all know there's $30,000, $40,000 product out there that is the size of a suitcase. And okay, you and I have talked ad nauseum. Most people don't actually need that. You say, I do because I have enough systemic stuff going on. Can we talk a little bit about signal to noise ratio and why your little teeny tiny micro device may or may not be different from what everyone else who's watching this, who's seen like, the original kind of thing you invented. I want to talk about microcurrent, signal to noise ratio, and then I want you to circle around to your three M1, the A9, and the C5 before we bounce, because I want people to know when, where, and how those types of devices might be right for them. Like what kind of user would want an M1 versus an A9 versus a C5? But first, signal to noise ratio. Go.
Okay, so signal to noise ratio is an interesting one. And the question with PEMF is like, how much of the signal that we're putting out or the energy we're putting out is biologically meaningful? And how much of it is just superfluous, right? And that brings you to the phenomenon of the child's game, 20 questions. So I could think of anything in the universe, right? And you could guess it in 20 questions. And how do you do that? And the way that you do it is called a binary search. you cut the universe in half. You say, basically, is it animal or mineral, right? And then you keep cutting the universe in half, and then you're like, it's a daisy. It's a gummy bear. You can cut the universe in half 20 times and bring it down to like a really specific thing. Well, that's exactly what I did with this PEMF. When I was able to find in my consulting with NASA back in the mid 90s that we could make it work, I started asking the question, what part of that waveform makes it work? So I started cutting the waveform in half. And then when I told you beginning here that it was 99.8% efficient, 99.8, percent efficient, 500 times more efficient, that's because exactly that what I was doing was I would cut out part of the waveform, retain part of the waveform, and then do I still get the same biological effect, which I was testing in my trusty old broken back. And if it stopped working, then I knew this part of the signal that I threw out, that was important. And if it kept working, then I could safely throw out that part of the signal and I could cut it in half again. And so by doing that, I ended up with a signal to noise ratio 500 times better than you'd get if you just use a simple sine square or triangle wave generator. You can make it 500 times more efficient if you only use that very specific part of the waveform, which it's not a secret. I publish it. I patented it, but I've patented it, of course, so to protect it so people can use it, so that somebody can't like prevent another person. I permit other people to use it so no scumbag can take it away, right? So I've patented it like 4 times, and it's that part of the wave which you don't normally see in nature. It's just this one part that has the physiologic effect. And why would you not normally see it in nature? Well, your body, when it's trying to interact with nutrients and energy giving things, it wants to be sensitive to the things that are in nature because it wants to absorb them. However, when it wants to have internal signals that don't get all jumbled up, like you don't start doing the funky chicken every time you walk out in the sunlight, your body has to use signals that are different from what you have in nature. So if you're sending a signal with PEMF, it needs to be something that you don't otherwise encounter all the time.
And you're using a trapezoidal wave, right?
I'm using a very specific trapezoidal wave, which I've published. And if you just use that, I haven't been able to cut it down to less than that, but I've cut it down to the smallest particle of that total waveform that actually has a very reliable, robust biological effect. If you do any less than that, you start to lose things. If you do any more than that, it doesn't get any better. It's just more energy, right? And so that gives you the maximum signal to noise. It's almost, to the best of my ability, it's all signal and no noise. Now, I'm sure it's not, perfect, but it's as close as I can get it.
God, do I aspire to that and fall short. All signal, no noise. Come on, Bob. That's amazing.
I'm doing my best. I'll tell you what, the thing
That's
is,
incredible.
If you focus on it, you do it in small degrees, right? You do it by small degrees. And it took me more than 20 years to achieve that. But that's the result of 20 years of carefully, slicing this down to its absolute essence. That's the thing. And that's just one of the, I kind of feel like that's my big contribution, I guess, to this whole thing is, to the whole field of PEMF. I mean, I didn't invent it or anything, but what I did do was say, of the entire universe of electromagnetism, it's this one little thing that has the profound biological effect. You got to have the whole thing, but you don't need to add anything to it to get the maximum benefit. And
that's huge right there. In a world full of people overdoing everything, over breathing, over acting, over exerting, over connecting, over networking, signal to noise ratio. I just want to kind of leave it with that. Lastly, if I'm interested in going on micro-pulse.com and checking out some of this stuff, what would be the best? Is it the A9? That's where I entered. Is it the M1? Who's using the A9? Who's using the M1? And who's using the C5? Just for everyone listening and watching.
So I actually, there's four of them. There's another one called a B5, which allows you to program it. Okay, we don't want to talk about that. Don't anybody ever buy that one, because that's what I use for research. And occasionally I run into a kook who says, I want to do research. And I'm like, okay, well, all right, I'll let you use one of these.
Can you just
But that's,
imagine though what you could do designing your own pulses and putting them on your head? How could
well,
that
the
work?
thing is, I don't use it because it doesn't work any better than the A9, the M1, or the C5. So, but it's there, for the perennial, just, I have to see for myself. But I actually, to answer your question directly, okay, the A9 is generation 5.0 ICES. I improved the circuit a fair amount, so it's a little more electronically efficient, can use a battery for longer, it can be a little bit smaller, right? But functionally, biologically, it's really not any better. So we kept the A9 because it just runs on a 9-volt battery. It's very robust. People will tell me,
I gave it to
yeah,
my parents, man. My parents live with an A9. That was mine after surgery.
yeah.
That's how much I
Well,
love them. I'm like, take this. You need it.
construction workers, people like me working in a machine shop and different things. Yeah, you can beat the hell out of them and they keep going. And it's really simple. You turn it on and it works. You don't have to adjust a bunch of different things. So the A9 is a place to start. And I've got it so that it's got the best of the best that I can put into the simplest. I took the best thing that I could possibly take that works for the most people for the most different things, with one button, and put it onto the A9. And that works for like almost everyone for almost everything that PEMF is going to work for. Then if you want more, if you want to like think about things like brain entrainment or doing, research on different kind of frequency patterns and things like that, or if you're super hypersensitive, for example, and you need more control over intensity, things like that, then there's the M1, or if you need more just coils, just outputs, the C5. But where the entry door and the cheapest one, the least expensive one, is the A9. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's where you want to start. And I still use it. I mean, that's why I carry it around in my pocket all day long, and it keeps my surgical site swelling down for my hip replacement.
I think that about covers it. We've talked about what the human cell is, how the mechanism of PEMF might possibly work on it, how you're using it, where it came from, what the different devices are. I think we'll check in next week to see how you're doing and what's going on in week 3. I expect all of your pathoticity to be gone. It shall be expunged from your cellular process by next week. And we'll see
Well, they
you.
told me not to
Oh,
sit up straight. So next week, it may be that you can see me sitting up like a normal person instead of lying down in bed. They told me they didn't want my legs folded at 90 degrees at the hip, basically, for a while. So,
okay. We'll catch you lying down, Dr. Bob Dennis.
all
Thank you,
righty.
everybody who's listening. By the way, tell them where they can go. Micro-pulse.com, right?
Correct.
Micro-pulse.com. And if you
That's the one.
type in Sage 50 or Sage 100, you'll get $50 off the M1 version and $100 off the C5. What that does is it gives you a little bit of money back and helps me and Bob play tennis back and forth with, oh my God, another one, another one, another one. We're trying to get as many of these devices out into the world to actually help people, because I have survived without opioids or sucking the front side of a pistol in more pain than an average human could ever take. And ask Bob, ask me, when the pain doesn't go away, you'll do
Amen, dude.
anything. So this man's found a thing. I'm excited about it way before I was selling or talking about selling it. I have been giving this to everyone I love. So Bob, thank you. Thanks for being in enough pain to make a thing that a guy like me in enough pain can experience. And you gave me back my quality of life. So for anyone listening, it's all on you. Experiment. Know your own body. Try your own process. Experiment with what works and what doesn't. But if you go to micro-pulse.com and do your research, look at the science, you will find something that we're talking about here that has worked for me and is currently working for the man that invented it. We are Two Dudes Healing. We'll be keeping this going as long as you're interested. So please feedback, leave comments and everything down below. And we'll see you on the other side. Bob, anything you want to say?
No, sir. I'm just looking forward to our next talk.
All right, brother. Two Dudes Healing.
All right.
I love healing next to you, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Yep. Talk to you soon.